According to my notes, I had 415 plays of 224 unique board games this year, with over 155 of them being games that I played for the first time. So when I say that I take my job as a board game sommelier seriously, I'm not lying. I really do play a bunch of board games so I can tell you which ones are the best, and I plan to make good on my promise right here, right now. So if you want to know my top sommelier suggestions for 2024 for board games that I love and that you will too, then might I suggest? Hi, I'm Alex from Might I Suggest a Game, a channel devoted to helping you find your perfect board game. Today, like I mentioned before, we'll be talking about the best board games of the year, the official 2024 Suggested Awards. If you haven't seen one of my top games videos before, I like to do things a little bit differently. Basically, I've got 6 different award categories that I use to rank games. First is my top table hoggers, which are the games that I played the most this year. Then it's my top games off the back of the shelf, which helps me highlight older games that no one's talking about anymore, but that are still so good. Next is my top underrated gem, where I talk more about obscure or hard to find games that you should be seeking out. Then it's my top second date game, which are games that I've played once, enjoyed, but haven't had a chance to get to the table again. Next is the top new game in my collection, which features games that I like so much that I kept them, which given the rate at which I receive and play new games, that's really saying something. And lastly, of course, is the big kahuna, my top overall game of 2024. Now that you know the categories, I'd love to hear what games you'd be nominating. Let me know what your picks are in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to hit subscribe and that little bell button so you can get notified when I post new content. Anyways, let's get into it. Will one of my favorite games of the year be the perfect game for you? Let's find out, shall we? Alright, the first category that we're going to be talking about today is my top table hogger, which is, again, the category about the games that I played the most this year. Now, I've been tracking a lot of stuff in my Board Game Stats app, so some of this is empirical, but some of these are just games that I feel like I played a ton of this year. So I'm going to start off with the honorable mention, which is, of course, Flip 7. Flip 7 is a super fun push-your-luck card game for 3 to 99 players from the op, and I think it would definitely be higher on this list had it not come out fairly recently. Essentially, the game just uses a kind of simple blackjack mechanic where you either choose to hit or stay on your turn, so everybody pretty much already knows how to play going into it, which is fantastic, and means it's so easy to get to the table. All you have to do is flip over 7 numbered cards in front of you to try to get the most points, but the trick is that if you ever flip over a number card that matches one of the other number cards that you already have, then you'll bust and you won't score any points that round. So you're always taking a bit of a risk, and that really is the fun part. If you choose to stop, you'll get to score the points of whatever cards that you have in your number row at that time, so the higher numbers will score you more points, but it's also a pyramid deck, so there's 2 2s, 3 3s, all the way up to 12 12s, which means that there's a high risk and a high reward to getting those high numbers. This game is super fun, it's really easy to get to the table, and I've just been playing it non-stop recently, so I knew this one had to go on my list, even if it was just for the honorable mention. Now, my runner-up for this category is another small box game, and you'll start to see a bit of a theme here. 2024 really was a year of small box games. There were so many compact games that were just so good and so easy to get into that I couldn't resist playing them basically any chance that I got. So with that in mind, my runner-up for this category is a cool game called Pray Another Day. Now, I've talked about this one a little bit. This was a great family game for me and one that I love bringing with me on vacations and traveling to different getaways because, again, it's one of those games that you feel like you already know how to play. Pray Another Day is a clever little game about the food chain for 2 to 5 players from Pegasus Spiele, and I love it because there's a little bit of a bluffing, a little bit of strategy, but at the end of the day, all you're doing is taking a card from your hand and playing it face down, and then revealing it when the time is right, which makes it easy enough that even my 3.5-year-old could handle it. In the game, you've got a hand of 5 cards, each representing a different link in the food chain, and you're basically just trying to be the last animal standing at the end of the round. However, if multiple people survive till the end, then it's the player who has the most points, which means there's always a benefit to play these cards that are lower in the food chain, even if it means you're more likely to be hunted. I love this game because it really is easy to teach. I'm usually not a fan of let's just jump in and play the game and learn that way, but with this game you can actually do that. Most times I'll just deal out a hand and tell everyone to pick a card and we'll go from there. I love how easy it is to get to the table, and more importantly, I love the sort of aha moment that people have when they play it for the first time, because they realize, oh, okay, if I play that card, then I'll be able to hunt this other card and maybe I can then eliminate all the other players before I get to the end of the round, etc., etc. There's a lot of interesting strategy that that reveals itself as the game goes on, especially for such a compact game, which I'm a huge fan of for sure. So if any of that stuff sounds right up your alley, then definitely check out Pray Another Day. And my number one top table hogger of 2024 has to go to Trio, aka Nana, which surprises me not at all because I'm constantly recommending this game to anyone that will listen. Nana is the Japanese version of this game that came out a little while ago, and it was ported to the States as Trio. It's a clever set collection card game for 3 to 6 players from Happy Camper, and I like to describe it as Go Fish with a little extra spice. Essentially, if you know how to play Go Fish, then you know how to play this one, which is one of the reasons why I love it so much. This is a game that gets out pretty much any time that I have more than 3 people around. I just can't stop getting it to the table because I don't think I've ever had a bad time playing it. All you have to do in Trio is get 3 sets of 3 of a kind. It's pretty easy to do, but the way that you do that is what makes it tricky. On your turn, you'll be asking someone what their highest or what their lowest card is. Then they'll reveal it to you, and you can ask somebody else the same question. Now, if the second card is revealed and it matches the first one, then you can keep going, and if you manage to find 3 in a row, you get to keep them in front of you as 1/3 of your final objective. In addition to the main win condition, I also love that you can add in the extra spicy rules on top, where you can win with only 2 trios as long as they add up or subtract down to 7. Or you can even win with only 1 trio provided they're all 7s. All of these subtle rules are easy to remember but lead to some super fun moments, and because it has a very low barrier to entry, it's really easy to get started with. And like the other games I mentioned previously, it's another game that lets the strategy be discovered as you play more and more. It's full of really fun moments like finding a secret 7 in the middle or sneaking out a win at the last second. And I just played it a ton this year, so I'm so glad to have this one in my collection and so happy to continue to share it with everyone, especially my little itty bitty mini copy of Nana with the Sai Beppu artwork on it.
It's so cute!
So if you're looking for a really quick game that feels fresh and familiar at the same time that you can really bring out for any occasion, whether it's a party where you want these big moments and people getting excited at the table, or just a chill get together where you can have fun and have a conversation over a game, then might I suggest Trio. Boom, suggested! Alright, the next category is my top game off the back of the shelf, which is a fun category where I talk about games that I haven't played in a while, but that I recently got back to the table and realized just how good these games were. The first is my honorable mention, and that one has to go to Iki. It's actually a funny story. This is the game that helped me ring in the new year of 2024. I actually played it on New Year's Eve because in the game you play over the course of a year, and the final round, the 13th round, is actually a New Year's celebration, so I felt like that was pretty thematic. But I played it a couple more times throughout the year, and I just really like this one. Iki is a game for 2 to 4 players about visiting the different shops in your Japanese town and supporting local businesses, hiring and training artisans, and ultimately trying to end with the most points to become the best citizen in town. Now, one thing I really like about Iki is that it uses this cool rondel to determine your actions for the turn. Basically, at the beginning of your turn, you have to vie for control over a limited group of spaces to decide how far forward your worker will move, and then as you move around, you'll be trying to hit the exact right location so that you can get to the right resources, the right income, and the right actions to feed your people and have enough money to spend on other things like buildings and other artisans. Speaking of artisans, another thing I love is that throughout the game you'll be hiring these artisans and then placing them in the different shops all around the board. Your artisans can gain experience when their action is called upon, but only when another player activates it, so you can try to place them in a strategic location to help you out and just hope that their skill is valuable enough for other people to use them. Once each artisan gains enough experience, they can officially retire so that you can add even more artisans to the board and use their retirement income for the rest of the game. Iki is a really smooth and really clever game. I think it's super underrated and nobody really talks about it because it came out in like 2015. But the most recent version is visually stunning and just a really solid game, so I can't recommend it more highly. I always give this recommendation to folks who come into my store and are clearly looking for a board game, but I really think that this game appeals to all kinds of people, even folks that don't play a ton of games. So if that sounds like you, then make sure you check out Iki. Next up is my runner-up for this category, and this one has to go to Yokohama. Now, Yokohama has been one of my favorite games of all time for quite some time. I just love the sort of worker placement action system puzzle that you do in it. Yokohama is a game for 2 to 4 players about being in another Japanese city, but this time you're not just in the market. You'll be moving around to the different locations around the city, trying to gather resources, complete your orders, and build some successful shops to become the greatest merchant the Meiji period has ever seen. Now, what I love about this game is that it has a really cool sort of action system where you'll be placing a certain amount of workers on the the board to not only influence your action on this turn, but also to plan your route for future turns. So it really rewards your ability to think ahead and plan your route on the board so that you know what steps you need to take in order to accomplish what you want. I love games that reward that sort of efficiency and planning ahead, and Yokohama does that wonderfully. Another reason that I really enjoyed rediscovering this game this year is because I managed to get my hands on the new and improved visual version from Synapses Games that just came out this year. I had a copy of the old Tasty Minstrel version, which was essentially exactly the same game, but also was notoriously quite beige, and the iconography on it was pretty rough, which meant that I had a really hard time getting it to the table because it wasn't a very inviting prospect when pitching it to new players. But now with this new art and the new components, you've got double layered player boards and all kinds of really awesome wooden pieces. Yokohama is super easy to get to the table because it looks really nice, and now I feel great because I can finally introduce people to one of my favorite games of all time and they'll be excited to play it with me. Anyways, I was very pleased to have played Yokohama again this year, and I'm super stoked to have this beautiful new copy. So if a really cool take on a worker placement game that combines route building and order fulfillment into a really strategic package sounds right up your alley, then you should definitely check out Yokohama. And lastly, my number one game off the back of my shelf this year has got to go to Crusaders Thy Will Be Done. Now this is, funnily enough, another Tasty Minstrel game that has been out of print for some time, but I discovered it when I was looking for other games that had rondel mechanics in them because I've realized that I really enjoy that type of mechanic. And after doing some research and discovering this game, I managed to snag myself a copy even though it's out of print. Anyways, Crusaders Thy Will Be Done is a classic game of conquest for 2 to 4 players where you play as different orders of crusaders exerting your influence over different territories and trying to be the most prestigious order of knights in the realm. Now thematically, I will say I'm not super stoked on the whole crusade colonization kind of situation, but I promise the actual gameplay is super good. One of the things I like about the game is that you always have to be considering the relative value of each of your actions and planning ahead by buffing these actions on your rondel. Every time you take an action, you take all of the action markers that you have on that spot and you drop them one at a time on the next consecutive spots on your rondel, a la Mancala, which means you have to really consider each move so that the right action has the right power at the right time. I also love that instead of doing an action with your action points on your turn, you can flip over one of the sections of your rondel to upgrade it, which will help you much more in the endgame at the price of an early game turn. I also like that it's kind of a race. It's a race to collect all of the prestige points that are available, but there's a finite number of them depending on your player count, and the game ends once they're all gone, so you've always got to be taking points here and there to make sure you don't get left in the dust. The speed and the countdown of the game means you are constantly rushing around the board, trying to get to different areas first, trying to sneak in on other people's territories and grab them to increase your influence and your income. Frankly, I think this game is fantastic. I really wish that rondel systems would be used in more games. I've been really loving this one from a mechanic standpoint, which means that the only thing left is to give it a facelift from a theme perspective. So if you know who owns the rights to Crusaders Thy Will Be Done, or if you got Seth Jaffe on speed dial, then tell him to hit my line because this game deserves to be on way more tables. So if you're looking for a really tight and clever action system that leads to strategic gameplay that rewards you for thinking a few steps ahead and also plays surprisingly quickly for the amount of strategy included in the game, then might I suggest Crusaders Thy Will Be Done. Boom! Suggested! Alright, next up is my top underrated gem of the year. This category is pretty self-explanatory, so I'll just jump right into my honorable mention. This is one that I talked about in my best games of the year so far video. It's a game called Lightspeed Arena. This one is fantastic, but it's a tough one for me to really recommend all the time because it's kind of hard to find. They had a Kickstarter campaign, but it hasn't fulfilled yet, which means it's also not in distribution, but for whenever it does officially come out, you should definitely bookmark this because this game is awesome. Lightspeed Arena is an extremely fast-paced and chaotic game for 1 to 4 players from Tablescope, and this one is guaranteed to have folks staring at you from across the bar. Basically, you'll be taking your spaceship tiles that you have in a stack and placing them out on the field of play, the boundaries of which have been determined before the game. These ship tiles have different lasers pointing in different directions that have different damage levels, and they also might have some shields for a little protection, but you've got only 10 seconds to place each ship, so you gotta do it super quickly, and you really have to trust your instincts, because by ship number 3, the field is already so crowded that you have no idea what's going on. The game is constantly changing because everybody's placing ships at the same time, so you never really know if your ship is going to wreak havoc or if it's going to be completely obliterated before it even gets a chance to do anything. The other cool part is that your ships will fire in numerical order, so the weakest ships will start first, which means that even though your big ships can do a lot of damage, if they get destroyed before their turn, then you're SOL. Now, that being said, the actual best part about this game is the fact that there's a companion app and it will do an entire AR recreation of your match, ship by ship, complete with the laser sound effects and the visuals and everything. It really just makes it a super engaging game that you can play in 5 minutes or less, which is really hard to do. I've brought this to several parties and it has been a hit at all of them. I've really enjoyed my plays of this game and I can't wait to get my hands on the final copy, so if you like quick and chaotic party games, keep an eye out for Lightspeed Arena when it becomes more widely available. Now, the runner-up for this category is a game that isn't necessarily from an unknown publisher, but it's just a game that I don't really feel like got much hype at all this year, which is puzzling to me because personally, I have really enjoyed it, and that game is Word Traveler. Word Traveler is a wonderfully simple party-weight word game for 2 to 5 players from Office Dog that really surprised me. I love a good word game, and this one feels like a great twist on the code names, hidden word, party game genre. Plus, I love that it's cooperative and that you're using words to describe different images. It's basically like a mix between regular codenames and codenames pictures, but with a nice traveling theme thrown in that really takes it to the next level. Basically, in the game, you have a passport that has some special locations on the city grid that you want your character to travel to. The grid is the same for everybody, and depending on the city that you use, it's got a bunch of images that represent that city. You can play in Paris, or New York, or London, or even Tokyo, but whichever city you choose, you always start from the center square. Your goal is to use the 10 word cards in your hand combined with your arrow tiles to get your teammates to guess your perfect itinerary. The 10 word cards that you get in your hand at the beginning of the round really limit your description options, which in my opinion instantly makes it better than codenames, which ends up being a little bit too loosey-goosey for me because there's so many things that you can say to connect it all that you're always trying to find a better word. But in this one, you've only got 10 words. Well, actually, you've got 20 words because each of the word cards can be flipped to indicate the opposite of whatever they say, so that gives you a little bit of flexibility. Word Traveler is really easy to pick up but surprisingly difficult to master. There's always lots of discussions that happen around the table where everyone is discussing what one player specifically meant by their words, while that player is sitting there trying to keep a straight face and hold it all together. I just think it's super fun, and when you get it right, man, it feels so good. I always love a cooperative game when people can all be on the same team, and this one is a fun challenge that also lets you explore and learn new things about new cities. So if you like those kind of word-based party games, but you don't like how long codenames usually takes because you spend so long thinking about the perfect clue, then you should check out Word Traveler because it's really, really good. And last of all, my number one game in the top underrated gem category is one that I just acquired recently, but I've been really enjoying. It's Typeset. Typeset is a push your luck word game for 1 to 6 players from DVC Games, and compared to Word Traveler, this one feels more like a classic word game a la Scrabble. Like I said before, I love a good word game, and I really don't think that they get nearly enough recognition in the board game space, but Typeset also takes this genre and really does something new with it, which I really appreciate. I've been keeping my eye on DVC Games a lot recently. They sent me a game called Corvids that was really fun. It's kind of about set collection and flipping over cards as if you were a crow and using these tweezers to be your beak. I thought it was such a clever use of the mechanism and just something fresh and new, which I'm always on the lookout for. Anyways, I picked this one up at PAX Unplugged and I've already played it a bunch, which is definitely saying something. In Typeset, you're trying to push your luck to spell the longest words possible. You've got a bunch of rows in this grid, and each round there will be 5 consonants that come out one at a time, and you have to place them somewhere in your grid. If you've got an empty spot, you can start a new word with that consonant, or you can add it onto an existing word, and you have a bank of vowels that you can use at any time so you can connect the gaps between other letters. You want to make sure that you're preparing yourself for any sort of consonant that might be revealed, because usually in the game, not even half of the consonants that are available will come up, so you're really just trying to keep your options open as long as possible. You'll need some really clever strategies to create the longest words that you can, but you can also complete these separate objectives that are on your board in order to get some wild letters, which you can use to make your incomplete words real, or even extend some of the words that you've already finished. After a couple of rounds, you might be getting close to not having a lot of potential letters remaining, and while you can take errors in your typeset for potential negative points, you don't want to get stuck in a round where you get a bunch of consonants that you can't use, so it really is a tricky decision to make. Do you want to keep going and hope that you get the exact right letters, or do you just stop there and assume that you've got enough points to win the game? And the tricky part is, if you ever have to place a letter into your word that doesn't work, or if you simply don't finish a word, you'll have to take negative points for that word instead. You really have to weigh your options when it gets closer to the end of the game to see if you'll get that perfect combo that you need to to finish off a word, and every game of this that I've played has had great tension and has been super fun. Plus, there's these really awesome power cards that get added to the game that can make each game a little easier or a little bit more chaotic, which I love. So if you're looking for the next generation of word game, if Scrabble is feeling too old, you're tired of bananagrams, and you want a word game that still scratches that spelling itch, but does so in a surprisingly strategic way where every decision counts, then might I suggest Typeset. Boom, suggested. Alright, the next category is my top second date game, which is a fun category that I like to do about games that I played one time and really enjoyed, but would love to play it again to get to know it a little bit better. Kind of like a second date. So my honorable mention in this category has got to go to a game that I acquired recently, but I was really impressed by. It's Fuego. Fuego is a trick-taking game with a twist for 2 to 4 players from Keymaster Games, and I love a good trick-taking game, so I was immediately taken in by the concept as well as the amazing artwork and art direction for the game. I just think Keymaster does a wonderful job with production, and Fuego is no exception. In Fuego, you'll be trying to strategically win tricks to ultimately extinguish your opponent's flame. Each team starts with a certain number of flame tokens, and you'll need to win tricks with low cards in order to steal flame tokens from the person next to you. So it almost feels backwards from a trick-taking perspective, where you have to save the high cards to make sure that your opponents don't take tricks with their low cards, even though if you win a trick with a high card, it won't net you any of their fire tokens. So there's definitely this back and forth decision making when you're choosing what to play that feels really rewarding. The other thing I really liked about this game was the matching mechanic, and you know, match, Fuego, already love the pun there of course, but the mechanism itself is something I haven't really seen, which is always a plus in my book. Basically, if you play a card that's the same number as the card that was played previously in the trick, you get to nullify that card by flipping them both over. They're no longer in the trick, which means that depending on when you match the card in the trick, it totally changes the strategy of that specific hand. So for example, if someone plays the first card and then you match it with the second card, then basically the trick starts anew for the third player and there's only 2 cards left. Whereas if someone plays the third card in the trick and you match that card with the fourth card in the trick, then you are essentially nullifying the third card that was played and just giving power to whoever played first and second. It's a really clever mechanic, and it's gonna take a little while to wrap my head around it, but I was super impressed, which is clearly why I need to get it to the table again soon. And I know I mentioned it before, but the production of this game is absolutely fantastic. Plus there's some wildfire cards in the game, which I didn't even mention, that act as a wild suit, not as a trump suit, but just as a wild, which is so interesting in a trick-taking game. Fuego kind of blew my mind with all the cool things it has going on, and I can't wait to play a little bit more of it with some of my savvy trick-taking friends. The next one on my list is the runner-up for this category, which is Mistborn the deck building game. Mistborn the deck building game is an ultra-thematic entry-level deck building game for 1 to 4 players from Brotherwise Games, who has absolutely been crushing it lately in my opinion. Now, I only got a chance to play this one once in preparation for some of the videos that I was making, but I very recently, like this year, got into Brandon Sanderson, I finished the Mistborn series, and I've also recently started the Stormlight Archive, so all you Sanderson fans, drop your favorite books down in the comments and all that. Anyways, I was really excited about this one because I had just read through the series and I was really interested to see how they would implement this really cool combat system that they have in the books into the game, and in my first playthrough, I thought they did a fantastic job. The mechanics of burning metals and flaring them and having to replenish them later really made this one feel like you were participating in the events of the book while you were playing the game. I was really excited for this one off the bat anyways, because it was designed by John D. Clare. I'm a big fan of his work. I love Space Base, Mystic Vale, Cubitos, etc, so I was really excited to see his hand in all of this, and I just think they came up with a really cool system that not only feels like it could be built upon, but also just so thematic. I'm excited to experience this one more in the new year, and it seems like there's extra room in the box as well for more content, so if you like deck building games, or if you like Brandon Sanderson and you want something that feels just like you're a character in the book but that still has quality board game mechanics that'll work for someone who hasn't read a single page, then you should definitely check out Mistborn the deck building game. Alright, the number 1 game on my second date games list has to go to a game called My Favorite Things. Now, I played this one at a board game retreat that I went to earlier in the year, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get myself a copy of it either, which is why I haven't played it more, but I really feel like if I had my hands on it, it'd be coming with me to all my functions for sure. My Favorite Things is a trick-taking, get-to-know-you party game. Yeah, you heard that right. For 3 to 6 players from Play for Keeps. Basically, the concept of My Favorite Things is that it's a trick-taking game, which, as I mentioned before, I'm a big fan of, but it's also a party game about getting to know the people around you. That combination immediately piqued my interest, and the execution was just fantastic. Essentially, what happens in the game is you give a category to the person to your right. It could be anything from your favorite ice cream flavor to best karaoke songs or something like that. They then fill out on each of their cards their top 5 favorite of those things, like my number one song might be I Want It That Way by the Backstreet Boys. That's my go-to karaoke song, by the way. And then on the Heartbreak card, you would put your least favorite of that category. But the cards are designed so that you don't actually see the value of the cards, just the answers that the person next to you wrote. And when you pass those cards back to the person who gave you the category, they'll take a look and try to determine the relative value of each of their cards based on what they think your answers should be. When I want to win a trick, I've got to play a card that's a high value, but there might be several different options that I could choose from, so it's a really interesting system because you always have some sort of imperfect information. There's always something where you think you know someone loves Rocky Road, and then you play Rocky Road, and it's their 4th favorite? What? I thought you were a Rocky Road person. And I just love that. Plus, there's also this really interesting thing where you can't be super obvious about what's your least favorite and what's your most favorite thing, because if someone plays something that's obviously their most favorite out of anything, they're typically gonna win that trick. However, if someone else plays a least favorite thing on that same trick, then they'll win the tiebreaker and actually take the trick. So you don't want to be super obvious about your categories or your answers to the categories, because that'll just give it away and make it really easy for someone else to win the trick. Basically, the trick-taking aspect of my favorite things is a total crapshoot, but that unknown factor makes every hand hilarious and so fun. I really enjoyed my play of my favorite things, and I've been trying to get my hands on a copy since I played it for the first time. So if you know anybody at Play for Keeps who can get me a copy, you let me know. So if you're looking for a really clever party game that acts both as an introduction to trick-taking games and also a fun get-to-know-you party game at the same time, which feels crazy saying in the same sentence, then might I suggest my favorite things. Boom! Suggested! Alright, we're getting close to the end. This is the second to last category. It's the best new game in my collection, and this category is a really interesting one because since I started this channel, I've been lucky enough to have received a lot of games from different publishers all over the world, and so I'm in a position where I really just don't have the time or the physical space to keep all of the games that I've been gifted. But if a game makes this list, that means that I'm keeping it in my collection, and I think that's kind of a big deal because at this point my collection is a one in and one out kind of situation, which means it was worth kicking something else out in order to add it to my collection. Anyways, the honorable mention in this category goes to Leaf, a wonderfully clever foliage placement game for 1 to 4 players from Weird City Games. This is a game that has a special place in my heart because I did have an opportunity to playtest this one before its release, but I also think it's just a fantastic game, especially for all you autumn lovers out there, or for any sort of nature lover for that matter. In the game, you're going to be placing the leaves on the forest floor as they fall down and connecting their vertices to take different actions. The first thing that struck me about this game when I played it for the first time and every time that I get it out to the table is just how nice the pieces fit together. It's got an amazing board state and table presence at the end of the game where you just have all these leaves on the table of all different colors, but also the way that each of the leaves tips can touch each other and allow you to gain extra actions. I think it's just really impressive, and I don't even know how Tim Eisner, the designer, came up with it. Anyways, in the game you're basically placing these leaves and taking actions to collect different critters into your den, to advance the season markers, to climb your squirrel up the tree, etc, etc. It's all super cozy with really cute art that draws you in, and it keeps you there with such a fun little spatial tile placement puzzle that is different every play. I've got a history with Leaf, so it obviously has a special place in my heart, but I'm just thrilled to officially own a copy. The only bummer is that I don't have the deluxe copy, which has these really amazing wooden leaves in it, so if you do get a chance to get your hands on the deluxe edition, I would definitely recommend it, because not only are the game pieces super sustainable and the production is really well done, but you're essentially just giving yourself a beautiful built-in centerpiece that you can play for years to come. So anyways, that's Leaf. It was worth adding to my collection, and I think it's worth adding to yours too. Alright, next up, my runner-up in this category is actually a game that I was recently introduced to, but I have just kind of been blown away by, and it would definitely be higher on this list, and maybe even my top overall games list if it had come along a little bit sooner. It's Da Da Da. Da 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 is a language-making party game for 2 to 99 players from the op, and even though I had this one on the edge of my radar, this game really surprised me. I had seen clips of people playing it at various conventions, it looked really fun, and I'm always looking for my next rowdy party game a la Monikers, so I had to take a look and I wasn't disappointed. I kind of love that chaotic energy that these types of games bring, and Da 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 definitely channels that chaos. Basically in the game you're given 5 unique syllables that are just random sounds, and you have to make a language out of it and categorize objects based on those 5 sounds. Now the only words you're allowed to say during the game are those 5 syllables, so you basically have a bunch of people around the table speaking nonsense and everyone else at the bar just looking at you weirdly and wondering why you're all saying Yizu wa over and over again. This game is just ridiculous, and hilarious and best with a ton of people, which is awesome.
And obviously this game would just be a really fun game on its own, but when I found out the story behind how it was created, that really took it over the top for me. Basically, the game was created by these NYU game design students who all spoke different languages, and so they locked themselves in a room together and came out when they had a game. And this was the game they came up with. It really does capture that idea of trying to communicate in a language that you don't naturally speak, and in that way, it almost creates a sense of empathy for people for whom English isn't necessarily their first language, and it just gives you new pieces in your toolkit to be able to communicate with folks that don't necessarily speak like you. So I think the game itself is super fun, obviously, but the message behind it is even better. I'm super excited to have in my collection because it's definitely something different than any of the other party games that I own, but also because I can see it getting into the table a lot in the coming year. So if you like those kind of crazy, chaotic party games and you really want to see what it's like for people to sound absolutely ridiculous around the table and come up with some inside jokes while you're at it, then you should definitely check out Anyways, the number one new game in my collection for 2024 has to be Fromage. Fromage is a really cool cheese-making worker placement game for 1 to 4 players from Road to Infamy games. I've talked about it several times this year. I talked about it in my most anticipated games. I talked about it in my holiday gift guide, but part of the reason why this game is so meaningful to me is because there's an insert in the game, a cheese tasting menu that's basically just an ad, but it's something that I designed. That's right, my name is on it. It's always so cool to see your name in a game, and this was a fun project to work on, but I'm also super stoked to own this game just because it's actually a really good game. I'm a big fan of worker placement games, especially thematic ones like viticulture, and as I mentioned before, I also love rondel mechanics, and this game takes a little bit of worker placement, a little bit of rondel, and combines it with some simultaneous action selection, which was a big part of why I loved Planet Unknown so much last year, and it smashes them all together into one big game. So it's got a lot of really good things going for it. I've been lucky enough to see Fromage from prototype to final production, and I really love the way that it turned out. I talked a lot in previous videos about the specific things that I like about this game, so if you want some deeper thoughts about why I'm super stoked to have this from a gameplay perspective, then you can go check out some of those videos after you finish this one. But basically, all you need to know is that it's a strategic game that, because you all play simultaneously, you can get it done in an hour or less, and I've really been trying to amass more games like this in my collection because I don't usually have as much time as I used to. Obviously, with 2 kids, I'm busier than ever, so I'm always impressed by games that really feel like you're having a full-on gaming experience in a manageable amount of time. Anyways, I'm super excited to have this one join my collection for personal and for gameplay reasons, so if you're looking for a really awesome and clever cheese-making game that combines a rich and strategic mix of mechanics with some amazing production and art and simultaneous placement so that you can get it done within the hour, then might I suggest Fromage. Boom, suggested. Alright, we made it to the last category, my top overall games 2024, and I still have 3 games for you, so don't worry, but we'll just go ahead and start with my honorable mention for this category. This one goes to a game that I've been talking about all year long. I raved about it in my best games of the year so far video halfway through the year, and that game is Daybreak. Daybreak is a climate-saving cooperative game for 1 to 4 players from CMYK Games, and it's just been one of those games that stuck with me all year. I was introduced to it earlier in the year, I played it several times on Board Game Arena and in person, and frankly, I just think it's a really great game. I mean, I love cooperative games that are challenging, but not impossible, which I do feel like some cooperative games take pride in. But Daybreak is definitely beatable, and you can always make it more difficult for yourself if you feel like it's too easy. But I also just like to win games, and I like to win them with my friends, so I don't think it's such a bad thing that it is manageable at first. Anyways, like I mentioned before, I've spoken about this game in many different iterations throughout the year. I love that it's about climate change, which is a really pressing issue, but it basically frames it in a way that's actually potentially positive, and that reminds us that if we work together, we can actually solve this thing. I also like that each player is trying to do their own thing and figure out their own board, which means there's little to no quarterbacking that happens in the game. Everybody feels like they have agency over their own plays, and when you win, you really feel not only like you've accomplished something, but that you were able to contribute to the success of others. Daybreak is just a fantastic game, but I also want to give a shout out to the rulebook because it really changed the game for me. It may be a little bit thicker than most rulebooks, but it's just because it separates this information in a really digestible way. I really think this game should be in everybody's collection, especially if you're a little bit touchy on the pandemic theme right now. The designer of Pandemic actually is also one of the designers on Daybreak, so you're definitely getting some really quality gameplay out of this one. Plus, it's super replayable because you never really know what kind of crises and what kind of events are going to come up each time. Anyways, I've been a fan of Daybreak since the beginning of the year. It's definitely stuck around, but it did get surpassed by a few things, so let's keep going. Next up is the runner-up for my top overall game this year, and this was a really big toss-up for me. I was really on the fence about making this my number one game of 2024 because one of the things that I value the most, especially at this point in my board gaming journey, is novelty. I really value games that are weird and that are different and that do something that's unlike anything I've experienced before in a game, and this game really takes that to the nth degree. It's Wilmot's Warehouse. Wilmot's Warehouse is a cooperative storytelling memory game for 2 to 6 players, also by CMYK Games, and of all the games that I played this year, this one is by far the most unique, and I think that's fantastic. After having played so many games over the last couple years, to find something that is actually fresh and unique and different from anything else I've played is really a pretty uncommon occurrence. So whenever I do get my hands on something like that, it always makes me really hopeful that there is more novelty to be explored within the board game space, and not every idea has already been thought up, because I feel like these days, it's really easy to get gaming fatigue. There's only so many different ways you can spin city building or deck building or tile placement, and especially if you're like me and you have dreams of designing a game someday, it can feel really overwhelming to know that there's just so much that's already been done. But Wilmot's Warehouse proves that you can still come up with novel concepts even at this stage of the board game popularity wave, and I think that's just wonderful. In the game, you'll have to remember 35 unique abstract items, but you'll have the power of collective memory and storytelling to help you out. Really, that's the big selling point for me, and the way that I've introduced this game to so many different people is that by the end of the game, you will be able to do something that you didn't think you were capable of at the beginning. And I really can't think of another game off the top of my head that's like that. For that reason alone, I knew it had to be on one of my lists somewhere, right? I just think that whenever a game can secretly teach you some sort of skill or give you a new perspective on how you approach your life, not just at the gaming table, but as a whole, it's just so impressive, and I think that's something that Wilmot's Warehouse does perfectly. When you play, you intuitively learn these hacks about improving your memory and about telling a story and remembering things, and especially in this day and age, for both people in my parents' generation who struggle with long-term memory or people in my generation who struggle with attention span, this game is a revelation. Wilmot's Warehouse is a wonderful exercise in focusing, pausing, and relating to a story, and it just shows the power of storytelling and how that can really make a memory last for a long time. It's something that kind of blew me away and really stood out to me this year. So despite its total weirdness, Wilmot's Warehouse is my runner-up for Game of the Year. So if you haven't played it yet, please try it, or come over to my house. I'll teach you how to play. It's literally so fun, and it's an absolute experience from start to finish. But even though it was so good, there was one more game that I felt deserved my top spot. So without further ado, my number one top overall game of 2024 goes to a little game called Let's Go to Japan. Now, I really wrestled with this category and this game in particular because it wasn't a game that immediately shot up to the top of my list. I played it for the first time in the spring, and I remember really liking it, and then I got a copy for myself, and I played it again, and then I played it again, and I kept introducing it to new people, and it would go over really well. I demoed it at my Sunday board game event, and it went over really well, and at a certain point, I had to evaluate and ask myself, is this gonna be my game of the year? It just kept popping up in my brain, and every time when I thought about something that I wanted to get to the table, whether on Board Game Arena or in person, I just kept coming back to this game. Last year was a little bit easier because I played Planet Unknown and I immediately said, okay, yeah, this is going to be it. This is my favorite game of the year. There's nothing that's going to top this because it's exactly how my brain works. But this year, even though I didn't really have a moment of clarity like that, the game I continually came back to the most was Let's Go to Japan. And so for that reason, it had to be my number one game. Anyways, for those of you that don't know, Let's Go to Japan is actually a game about planning your trip to go to Japan rather than actually being in Japan for 1 to 4 players from AEG. I just think this theme is fantastic and such a well thought out way to spice up what is essentially a calendar filling game. But it also has this beautiful art and some really surprisingly simple gameplay where on your turn, you just follow the guide in the middle of the table and do exactly what it says. Most of the time, you're just playing a card and then passing the card, so your decisions are very simple throughout the game, but it's where you arrange the cards that you place in each day and how you select cards from different decks that really changes the way that you can score throughout the game. Every single game I've played of this has been completely different, which I love, and there's not really one particular strategy that I found to be overly powered. Sometimes you can just try to visit all of one city all at once, and sometimes you have to bounce between both cities a bunch of times. It just kind of depends on what your card draw looks like. Do you take the card that gives you the best one-time point bonus, or do you take the card that provides a valuable symbol or endgame objective that could swing the game in your favor later on? Let's Go to Japan does a fantastic job of making the decision-making process really streamlined, but still giving it enough weight where every decision feels like it really matters as the game hastens towards its end. Especially when your days are starting to fill up, you really feel that tension of, should I press my luck and try to draw new cards from the deck, or should I get rid of my cards and just take a walk so that I can guarantee some points for later? I just think there's a wonderful amount of tension, the perfect amount really, and the gameplay is just so simple that anyone can get into it. I've introduced this game to new players and to heavy strategy game players alike, and it's been a hit for all parties involved. Plus, and this kind of goes back to that storytelling that we were talking about with Wilmot's Warehouse, one of my favorite parts of the game is actually the exploring at the end, because you get to tell the story of why you went to all the places you chose to go to in Japan. And not only did that make me feel nostalgic for my previous Japan trips that I've taken, but it also just feels like you're in it together. It's all friendly. There's a little bit of player interaction because you're passing cards to other players, but you're generally not trying to screw anybody over. It's just a nice and cozy game that I just think deserves its flowers. And even though the base game still looks wonderful, I was lucky enough to grab the deluxe edition with a bunch of fancy bits. I have the ceramic bowls and the wooden tokens, and everything just looks perfect. Let's Go to Japan is just a wonderful experience from start to finish. Every time I've played it, I've wanted to play more of it. And while it didn't immediately hit me that this was going to be my game of the year, I've loved every single play of it. And when I look at all of the games that I played this year, this is the one that stands out as a game that I would go back to time and time again, just because I think it's a wonderful system, perfectly streamlined game that is wrapped in this beautiful package and has simple mechanics that lead to a more complex strategy, which is everything I look for when I talk about games on this channel and everything I look for when I add new games into my own collection. So if you're looking for a wonderfully strategic but surprisingly simple game that takes all of the beauty of Japan and combines it with really elegant gameplay that makes you feel like you're actually there rather than just planning your trip, then might I suggest Let's Go to Japan. Oh, suggested! Thanks so much for sticking around for my second annual Suggested Awards. I hope you get a chance to play some of these games and that you enjoy them as much as I did this year. And while it's fresh in your mind, don't forget to let us know your nominations for each of these award categories in the comments below. I can't wait to see what all of you suggest. Anyways, thanks so much for everyone who's supported me so far. We've really had a year of unprecedented growth, and for that, I am truly thankful. Here's some more board games in 2025. And of course, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so I can keep growing this channel and keep helping you find your perfect board game. Once again, this has been a Might I Suggest a Game production, and I'm Alex, your board game sommelier, signing off.